Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining on this quite muggy evening. This is the final episode in our grassland management series. I think this is the seventh or eighth webinar now, so there's been a fair few. This webinar is going to be focused on grassland management for CHEGD fungi, and I'll explain throughout this session what the CHEGD means. There's two speakers, me today, Joseph Haywood. I'm the Grassland Officer for Nidderdale National Landscape, and joining me is Steve Hindle, who is the grassland fungi guru. He is a grassland specialist with loads of years and experience surveying grasslands, the botanical side of it, as well as the grassland fungi side. So we're in good hands, and he's going to take the second half of the session explaining the importance of these grassland fungi and what the government's going to do to help protect them into the future. So the session is going to look like this. I'm going to take the first half for about 20-25 minutes. Steve's going to do the same, and then at the end we're going to have a Q&A. So if you've got any questions that come to mind throughout the session, feel free to just put them in the chat and I'll get to them that way, or you can put up your virtual hand at the end in the Q&A and we'll get to you that way. That's all my housekeeping. So the contents for my part of this session are, I'm going to go through what actually are the CHEGD fungi and what CHEGD actually means. Where can we find them? In and around Nidderdale, but also I live in Harrogate, in Jennyfield, and I'm finding Waxcaps in people's front lawns. So you don't really need to go out in the wilds to actually see these amazing, beautiful fungi. They could be in your garden if you're looking for it. I've got some earth tongs and some clubs in my garden, in the front garden, so feel very privileged. And then finally, how can we protect them? So at the end of the session, I want you to be able to, if you've got your own field, and if you're going out on a walk or you've got your own land, I want you to be able to go out, understand what these CHEGD fungi are, where to look for them specifically, and if you find them, that's awesome, and how can you protect them? So what are they? Well, they are initially hugely, amazingly colourful variety of fungi with loads of different shapes, textures, tastes, and smells. They can smell from kind of chlorine through to honey, so quite noxious, to really, really nice. The shapes are really interesting, from convex to concave, loads of different shapes, which we'll see. And the textures can range as well. So they're a really diverse form of grassland of fungi that's physically in the grasslands. They form associations with plants. They form a mutualistic relationships with grassland plants specifically. So as the grassland plants can photosynthesize and produce sugars, which the grassland fungi can't, but the grassland fungi are really good at accessing nutrients and minerals in the soils that maybe the plants aren't so good at accessing, and those two resources are exchanged between the plants and the fungi and allow the fungi to exist. So that relationship between the plants and the fungi is really important, and one that shouldn't be broken, which we'll go into in a bit later. So there are 5 groups that form the CHEGD, and with each letter in CHEGD meaning a different group. And apologies if I pronounce these wrong, and Steve, please correct me when it's your turn to chat. We've got the clavaroids, or the clubs and coral fungi. Included within this group as well are the spindles. Really, really interesting looking group, and quite distinguishable, really. We've got the hygrocybe, which are the waxcaps, which I think probably more of you are going to be familiar with. And the picture on the left is of a waxcap. Then we've got the entoloma, or the pink gills, more commonly known. This is the one I've been practicing, the geoglossiae. Fingers crossed that's right, or the earth tongs. And finally, the dermaloma and the relatives, like the craze caps and the fan vaults, which are also part of that group. So they're the CHEGD fungi as a whole. Let's go into each group a little bit more, in a little bit more detail. Forgot to say that when you're looking for these fungi, they start from September, the fruiting body season. So the mycorrhizae are living under the ground all year, but the fungi will fruit between September to November, but October and November are your bumper periods. They're your peak season. And the soils are still got some latent heat from late summer and autumn, but they're starting to be a little bit more moist as well, because you might have had some autumn rains, and so that mixture of kind of warmish soil still and the moisture helps them fruit. Many of these CHEGD fungi are on the IUCN red list as either vulnerable or endangered, and to protect them is really important. The UK is a hotspot for these CHEGD fungi globally. So what we've got, it's really important to protect. Let's go into the clubs and coral fungi. So yeah, included within this group, so not just the clubs and corals that I've written there, but also the spindles. The general features include, so if you look at the middle right picture, or at the top in the middle, the two white club fungi there, they're single individual clubs that are sticking out the ground. They can be really vibrant colours as well, and they stand out against the grass blades. They're not just only singles, you can get clusters of spindles. So if you're looking at the top right picture or the top left, it's quite hard to actually distinguish between a spindle that's potentially young and is not a spindle, or a young coral fungi, which is kind of on the bottom left and the middle left, which is loads of individual fronds coming up, but they may have just not grown and established enough. So when you're going out and looking to try and find these fungi, grouping them as the clavaroids is totally okay. And you've got the branch-like coral structures. And the names, you've got violet coral, yellow club. The handsome club is a great name, and golden spindles. In the bottom left, you can see the club called a skinny club that's kind of skin-coloured. And there is an association between the skinny club, or like a one particular species or variety of subspecies of skinny club, that has a relationship with a meadow waxcap. So it's really interesting that it's not only the relationships between the grassland plants and the fungi, but also fungi forming relationships with other fungi as well. So they're the coral and spindles and club fungi, quite distinguishable and identifiable. They can be easy to miss, especially the white ones and the skinny ones, which are like a bit more pale pinky color. So you're gonna have to get on your hands and knees to look for these. Now we're going to the Hygrocybe, the wax caps. Probably you're more familiar with. So they're probably well known and widespread. Probably they might be more recorded because they're just more easily identifiable. But the general features include a distinct head and stem. So oppositely to the clubs and the clubs, corals, and spindles, which are like mostly individual fronds coming up out the ground. When you're looking at Hygrocybe, they've got a distinct head on top of a stem. They're amazingly bright colours, and what you can see in the picture on the left, ranging from maybe more duller ochres and browns, all the way to vibrant reds, yellows, goldens, and rich oranges. The parrot waxcap can range from vibrant pink all the way through to a really deep forest green, depending on where the light and other external factors like the wind and rain have kind of changed the color of the waxcap. So they're a really bright array of colors, the hygrocybe. And their caps can be waxy with the wax caps, but they're not necessarily. They can be really quite dry, or on the opposite side scale, really slimy and glutinous. They can be really smooth and silky, or they can be quite scruffy and shaggy looking. So while they're called the wax caps, the caps of them don't necessarily have to be waxy. They can be loads of different types of textures. To give you a flavor of some of the species out there, my particular favorite in this list is the cedarwood waxcap. It looks like a snowy waxcap, and I think visually it's quite hard to distinguish, but you have a smell, and it smells like this beautiful pine fresh I think it should be bottled up and made into an air freshener, a deodorant or something. It's a really, really beautiful smell. In the middle there, the nitrous waxcap. I remember going out on a survey day with Steve and him finding that, and I thought that's absolutely stunk of chlorine. It wasn't a nice smell. Conversely, if you go to the honey waxcap, that's got a really beautiful, rich aroma, and I could just sniff that all day. So really, really cool. And I think when you're surveying, looking for these and getting interested in the CHEGD fungi, especially the waxcaps, you've got to be prepared to have a sniff and maybe even have a little nibble, because it just opens up another element to be able for you to identify the species. So that's the waxcaps. Now on to the entoloma, or the pink gills. So they come in an array of colors, just like the hygrocybe, but a lot of them can be quite brown or ochre colors. And the general features include, much like the waxcaps, they've got an obvious stem with a cap on top. As the name suggests, the common name, the pink gills, as the fruiting body matures, the gills will actually turn pink, and that's because the spores are pink. So if you're looking to identify whether you've got a waxcap, a hygrocybe waxcap, or an entoloma pink gill, flipping it over and looking at the spores flipping it over and looking at the gills is really helpful. And if they're getting pink on an older specimen, you've probably got a pink gill. One thing you can do is take the cap home, put it on a piece of white paper with like a cup over it to keep it a little bit moist and the humidity high. Leave that overnight and you'll get a spore pattern or a spore print that's produced, and you can identify the color of the spores at that point. So you've got the lilac pink gill on the screen now. Oh, sorry, I missed the final point there. They usually have quite a conical head. So rather than flat and depressed, you're going to have like a nipple on the top, and it's going to have a more conical shape. So that's the lilac pink gill currently up. I think this is an absolutely beautiful fungi, the bright sky pink gill. You can kind of see the fissuring and the texture on the cap as well as down the stem. I mean, the light bouncing off that, it's absolutely beautiful. And I reckon if that was covered in dew as well, it would take it to another level. And the matte pink gill, so slightly different shaped cap at that point, quite wibbly, and just look at the gills underneath there on that specimen flipped over. Really, really beautiful. And the felted pink gill, so not just the hygrocybe, the pink gills as well have different textured caps. So with 3 down, 2 to go. Now we're at the earth tongues, or the geoglossiae. These are quite an alien and mysterious group. And as I've said, they're a delight to see. When I found one in my garden, I was jumping up and down for joy, and I wonder what the neighbours were thinking. So the general features include, they're typically quite small, kind of going back to the hygrocybe. They can be quite tall. I found some right stonkers where you can hold the stem in your hand, and it's the length of your palm and then some, with a big conical head on top. So the earth tongs are usually quite small and dark in colour, and their shapes are either like tong or club shapes. So unlike the pink gills and the wax caps, the earth tongs don't have a distinct stem and a cap on top. They're more similar to the clubs, corals, and spindles, more like the clubs. And the deceptive earth tongue, olive earth tongue, hairy earth tongue, absolute great names. So, and just to give you a flavour of some how they look, that one's quite dry and dark and matte coloured. We've got some really slimy ones with like a blue stem at the bottom, changing to a more ochre green at the top. And this one, actually, similar to the coral, is like a cluster of the cluster of earth tongues, and they're deeper red colour. So a right variety in colour again, but they're usually quite dark, whether it's a green, a red, a blue, usually quite a dark version of that. Finally, we're going to the dermaloma, the craze caps, and the relatives, such as the fan vault, which you can see on the picture there on the left. So these are quite a large group, containing not only the craze caps, but the fan vaults, and something a bit confusedly named the mealy wax cap. So it's not a hygroscybia, though, it is a dermaloma. So the general features include that they're often quite grey or beige, maybe more of a muted colour. Like the pink gills and the wax caps, they've got an obvious stem and cap. And when they're starting to dry out, especially the craze caps, they have a cracked or crazed appearance. Thinking like lava drying and it's cracking. Some names, such as the common and dark craze cap or the black magic, pretty cool. And you can see there the difference between the two. That you could actually confuse the mealy wax caps for a wax cap for sure. But as you can see, quite beige, usually more muted, earthy colours. So they're the 5 groups that make up the CHEGD. Hopefully when you go in, walking in your grasslands from September to November, you're going to keep your eyes out for things, for these species, and you're going to be a little bit more informed. I'm going to mention an app later that you can download that Steve has actually created, designed, and produced, which I used last year for the survey season, and I thought it was really, really helpful. So we know what they are, but where can we find them specifically? There's no point in aimlessly wandering around. These have specific habitats like lots of plants do. And so what are they? Well, they strongly prefer undisturbed soils. And by undisturbed, I mean they haven't been ploughed, fertilized, or aggressively harrowed. And harrowing is a way to kind of break up the sward and the thatch. You drag around a bed of a blanket, essentially, of hooks and chains, or a springtime harrow, which is a comb, essentially, and you're scraping all the top surface of vegetation to help light and air reach the soil. And you can do that aggressively or more light touch. And it is thought that aggressively harrowing can also damage present fungi populations. So you're looking for areas that have not been ploughed, fertilized, or aggressively harrowed. And so the best places to find grassland fungi, these CHEGD fungi, are unimproved grasslands, specifically pastures, ones that are predominantly managed through grazing. However, they can be found in the 3 habitats mentioned below: meadows, heathlands, and coastal grasslands and sand dunes. I'm definitely finding wax caps in meadows, but I find more of them in pastures. And that's probably because in the lifetime of that meadow, it may have been fertilized or aggressively harrowed at some point, and even just one round of agricultural improvement can damage existing populations of CHEGD fungi. So they're quite sensitive to change. So you're going to look for ancient, unimproved grasslands. Pastures are the best, but those other three habitats can be great to find them as well. I think I mentioned this earlier, but Nidderdale National Landscape is internationally important for grassland fungi. We've got two sites, one that's nationally important and one that is internationally important, and they're finding species there that are potentially as rare as snow leopards. So the natural resources that we've got in Nidderdale are amazing, and they need to be protected. It's hard to get them established in new sites, so we need to identify where they are and protect them. How are we going to protect them? Well, initially, we do not want to use any fertilizers at all. So as they're found in unimproved grasslands, which are usually not fertilized, or if they're fertilized, they're used farmyard manure as opposed to tillage or inorganic fertilizers. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that it's the relationship between the fungi and the plants and the interchange of resources between them that help the grassland fungi to persist. But if you're adding fertilizer, the plants don't need the fungi then to access those nutrients, and that relationship between the fungi and the plant weakens and can potentially break. So adding fertilizer is a big no-no, especially in places that you've found there are some CHEGD fungi. One application can cause irreversible effects, so it's really important to do your research to identify these before doing any sorts of activities on your land. You can reduce the fertility in your meadows by taking a hay cut and removing the vegetation, and then not adding any additional fertilizer, whether that's farmyard manure or inorganic fertilizer. If you're going to mow your grassland and allow the mown vegetation to mulch back in, you're going to maintain the fertility of that soil, and also you're going to smother the ground, which can actually make it difficult for the grassland fungi to pop up through. And also it just makes it hard for them to find as well when you're surveying. So you don't want to use any fertilizers. Secondly, you want to keep your sward in check. So it's a really important part of grassland management is to manage the sward height, whether that be through mowing or through grazing. Grazing helps prevent tree saplings from encroaching in your land. And the more and more trees that you'll get on a grassland, the more and more shade is cast. And then that will change the plant species that can survive in the area. And then the grassland fungi can't form associations with those woodland plants as easily or not at all compared to the grassland plants. So it's all about trying to prevent trees growing on your grassland fungi rich grasslands. Tall sward can also impair the dispersal of spores from the fungi, so help preventing them from spreading further across the areas that they're already in, and it just makes finding them difficult once again. So they might be under-recorded because the tall swards making it harder to see, especially when some of them can be really small, like the earth tongs, which are black as well in some cases. So when the grassland fungi are fruiting between September and November, it's a good idea to either remove your stock, so they're simply just not running over them and trampling on them, allowing the fungi to grow, reach maturity and spore, or just have low stocking rates and low stocking densities if your land's big enough. CHEGD fungi like free, moist but free draining soils, and Nidderdale's probably a hot spot for them because we've got quite sandy soils that are free draining. Especially find them on banks where the water is easily shed. So if you've got a field that you know's got these CHEGD fungi in it, trying to maintain the existing drains is important. In wet fields, you're probably not going to find them as often. There might be like slightly high points in the area, which maybe will be a little hot spot for the CHEGD fungi. But if you've got them present and you can see the fields getting wetter, it's really important to ensure those drains are maintained. Talking about grazing to manage scrub, but it's really important to control scrub and tree encroachment. It changes the ground flora and the relationship between the fungi and the plants breaks down because it's not the same flora it's evolved to form these relationships with. Decomposing fungi can become more prevalent, breaking down tree roots and old fallen wood that's fell off the trees present in the grassland, and they can outcompete the grassland fungi. So it's really important when you're looking at tree planting schemes as well, important for conservation practitioners like ourselves to ensure that we've done our due diligence and identified grassland sites that have no waxcap interest. Because if they've got waxcap interest, planting trees in those areas can be dangerous for the grassland fungi to persist. So if you've got really good aspirations for wanting to plant some trees and you're doing it off your own back as well, you're not necessarily coming through Nidderdale or your protected areas, wherever you are, you might not even be in a protected area. But it's important just to hold off a minute if you've not looked for these wax caps and not looked for these CHEGD fungi, just to see where you want to plant trees, whether they're present. And a reduction in grazing can cause those tree saplings to come in. So keeping grazing high at the right times of year is important. My last point before handing over to Steve is you want to minimize your ground disturbance. As I mentioned, like aggressively harrowing or plowing the ground can break up the sward, break up the soil, and damage the mycelial networks that live underground. So you don't want to aggressively harrow or plow. Too much livestock can cause poaching and trampling, especially in the wetter months. So that point there's focusing more on not minimizing the disturbance to the fruiting bodies, but you can disturb the ground throughout the rest of the year, especially if you've got high numbers of stock, heavier stock as well, maybe even cattle in January, February. So ensuring that you're not trying to poach the ground and compacting the soil with lots of livestock in the wetter months. If you've got machinery just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger as agriculture intensifies, and that's causing more ground compaction. If you know there's CHEGD fungi in a field, do not drive your machinery over that area as best as possible, especially in wet weather. If you're getting around on a quad bike or any sort of small vehicle, stick to your general routes, maybe around the perimeter of your field, and stick to those areas. So any compaction you are doing is concentrated in specific areas. Yeah, as I said, stick to your known routes. Right, so in conclusion, we've got no fertilizers. And grazing's really important at the right time of year, though. You don't want to knock over the fruiting bodies. Grazing is important because it keeps trees in check, and you don't want to plant trees or allow scrub to encroach in areas where your CHEGD fungi are present. The CHEGD fungi like moist but free draining soil, so you want to keep your soils free draining by maintaining drains where possible. And just generally from day to day, minimize your ground disturbance as much as possible. So you're not damaging the fruiting bodies, but also the mycorrhizae that's underground. That's everything for me for now. I'm going to pass you on to Steve. So Steve, can I ask you to share your screen, please?
Yes, but you'll need to make me a presenter so that I can share.
Yeah, you thought I would have done that. Give me a second. Where are they, Steve? You're right at the bottom. Make a presenter. There you are. Hopefully you've got access to that now.
Okay, let me have a try. What's over here? Let's try this one. Okay, can you see that? Do you see?
Yeah, I've got that. Yeah.
Right, I don't know if I can. Let's try that. Can you see that?
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Okay. Right, so before I start on this, thank you, Joseph, for that. That was great. There's loads of stuff in there, and people have probably got loads of questions already. I just want to kind of start by saying that these fungi, they're really great. I'm really enthusiastic about them. They're really important. They're beautiful, amazing, all of the things that Joseph's been talking about. But also, they're good. They're good for the ecosystem. So Joseph was talking about the relationships that these plants, that the fungi have got with the plants. They're actually supporting each other, and so they're kind of forming this symbiotic relationship. Now, I tend to find doing botanical surveys and fungi surveys that the more botanically rich, also the more fungally rich, but often you're finding them in sheep growers' pastures where you don't see that diversity in the plants, but the fungi are there. Probably that plant diversity is there, but it's really heavily suppressed just by the tight grazing. So what benefit are they bringing to you? Well, they're helping to support a really diverse flora, and all of those different plants have got different biochemicals, and they're all providing benefit for your stock, for your animals, for their health. So actually they're really good to have on your land. If you've got them, that's a good thing. I have a small farm. I've got hay meadows, I've got pasture, I've got waxcaps all over, and I manage my site for both of those. So I'm kind of happy to answer any questions about how management might impact those things. One thing that I wanted to flag up just on what Joseph was saying at the end there, an issue that I often come across is feeding haylage bales. So if you put a haylage bale out, then around that bale you get a lot of poaching, you get a lot of bare earth. That earth then tends to attract docks and thistles. The nutrient load there is really high, and so if you've got good diversity in those areas where you put in your haylage bales, you lose that very quickly. So if you're feeding haylage bales through the winter, it's good to find somewhere that's fairly poor quality ecologically to do that feeding rather than on the more diverse areas. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the conservation value of these species, and then a little bit about the schemes that you may be able to get into. So you can see on this slide, we've got around 40 of these species across Europe that are at risk of extinction. So we might use words like rare, and some of them truly are rare. I mean, some of them, I've recorded one, which has been recorded once in the UK and I think once in Slovakia. So that's pretty rare. There's going to be more, and they haven't been recorded, but this is a really rare thing. But then there's also how quickly these things are being lost, and that's where the IUCN Red List comes in. So that's the threat of loss, generally to do with habitat loss. And so that's when you've got things which are equivalent to a giant panda or a blue whale or a snow leopard or a polar bear. It's to do with the habitat loss. So we're a stronghold for these threatened species, basically. So I'm just going to go through a couple of those and show you some data on those, get a sense of where they are and why they're there. So the glistening waxcap is one that's endangered. We've got two that are endangered. The mealy meadowcap, which we saw before, which is really rare. I think I've only recorded that, I think, twice, and I've been around for quite a long time. There are some sites in Derbyshire where, you know, it's been found up at Hadrian's Wall, but it's really, really rare. This one, the glistening waxcap, is endangered. Lots of habitat loss, lots of declining population, but it's still quite common, you know, and at least in my line of work, I see it quite a bit. And sometimes on a given site, there might be quite a lot. So this is from the IUCN website. And here we're seeing the global distribution. So it's really restricted to the UK and parts of Northern Europe. And if we kind of look at that picture and then look at the next picture, which is a kind of temperature picture, we can see how we've got these two factors, which are how hot it gets in the summer, how cold it gets in the winter, and then the other factor, which is the Atlantic influence, how much rain falls. So where we are in the UK, lots of rain, doesn't get that cold in the winter, doesn't get that hot in the summer. And that's similar to the kind of coast of Scandinavia and over in the Netherlands and what have you, and then also kind of into some of the mountainous areas in Europe. So it's those conditions there. So when Joseph was talking before about the autumnal conditions, what the fungi really like as far as the fruiting goes is they need to be able to kind of push out this mycelium into fruit, and they don't want that to dry out. So they like the ground to be consistent in its moisture. So if it's really hot during the day, everything's drying out, and then it's cold at night and there's a lot of dew, and it's really, really fluctuating. When you get to that stage of the year where actually it's not getting that hot during the day, maybe it's not getting that cold at night, everything's in a bit of a Goldilocks state. That can kind of happen at any time during the year. So, you know, there's a few records of waxcaps coming in now, or there were a few weeks ago when it was raining quite a bit. There won't be now when it's really hot. And if we have a very wet summer, then they can be coming all through the year. But it's really at that autumn time when we get the kind of big explosion. So that's why we've got them, because of this kind of Goldilocks conditions that we've got. Also, here in the UK, I mean, like in Europe, has got a lot of kind of lowland, and the agriculture has been more intensive across a lot of Europe, a lot of kind of Western Europe anyway. Whereas for us, where it's more hilly, soils might be poor, shallow, a bit more difficult to access. We've got lots of land which has just been put to grazing for a long, long time, like, you know, centuries. And it's that continuity of management which makes it really excellent for the fungi. So this is glistening waxcap records in the UK. This isn't going to be all of them, but these are all the records we've got on the database. And so you can kind of see there that actually Nidderdale's got potential to have them. They're around, but we've not got a lot of records, and that's probably due to a lack of recording rather than this species being absent. So we've got stuff to find, we've got sites to find that are important for this globally endangered species. The Jubilee waxcap is actually vulnerable, but has got much more restricted range. And this is the kind of extent of the global range. So there's a few dotted around Europe, but if we look there in the core of England, so we've got the South Pennines getting up into Nidderdale and kind of East Lancs and what have you, that's really where they are. And so again, we've got a lot more to find in Nidderdale. It could be a really good area for them. We've definitely got some records from there. But this just shows you kind of how few there are in the world and how we are such an important area for them. So if we've got them, we really need to be finding them and then hopefully conserving them if that's possible. The pink waxcap is one of the best known waxcaps and one of the most photographed, that's for sure, because it's known as the ballerina and it always looks kind of picturesque. It's one of our more common waxcaps, but globally it's threatened with extinction and it's vulnerable. And so you can see from this global map how, again, it's kind of the UK has got loads, and then we've got some of these more mountainous areas across Europe, and then some of these areas that have got this Atlantic kind of influence. So that's a really good one to look out for, actually, because it's a really good indicator that you've got something special. But across the UK, we've actually got quite a lot of them. That's a little bit more zoomed in there, so you can see we've got plenty of records there in Nidderdale, but we've still got a bit of a gap there, which just shows that we've got more recording to do. So this is just a little comparison with a species that you might be more aware of and we kind of think of as being threatened, and there's definitely plenty of schemes to look after the curlew, but actually from a global scale the curlew are near threatened and not currently on the vulnerable or endangered list. And there, if we look at the population records, it actually looks as if the population is doing better more recently, but that's probably about more records being put in. But we can see there that the population is quite healthy across the planet. Lots and lots of sites. So if you compare that to the fungi, sure, there are fewer people recording those fungi, but you know, some species which get quite a lot of attention are actually doing a lot better than the mushrooms, which get very little attention. So what are the government doing about it? Well, not a great deal. There's more to come, and hopefully there's going to be more access to more schemes, but for the time being you can go into a scheme if you're in countryside stewardship higher tier, and so if that's coming up for renewal and you've got these fungi, then potentially it could work well for you, because you get £528 per hectare, which isn't a bad payment at all, particularly if your land is otherwise not eligible for anything which pays as well. You know, if you're grazing sheep, then plant diversity is probably low. You'll be able to get some payments, but you're not going to get something as good as this. So you can see there we've got fungi on the list of things that we're trying to protect. So what to do, and this is the kind of beauty of it, that really, if you've got those species on your land, then what you're doing is the right thing. And so maintaining the management that you've had for a long time is the way to go. Now you might be able to enhance that habitat, you might be able to enhance it for plants, you might be able to make it a bit better for the fungi, but that's effectively going to be using fairly traditional methods, as Joseph was saying, basically doing and not doing those things. So it's basically just looking after the grassland, having a level of grazing which is beneficial, and then not doing all the things that he's been talking about, damaging the soil profile, basically, either increasing the nutrient load or disturbing the soil. And when Joseph was talking about maintaining drains, you know, that's something which, yeah, that's important, but also you've got to balance that with thinking about what's involved in maintaining that drain, when you're doing that work, and what destruction you might cause if you're doing that when the ground's wet or whatever, you know, if you've got a digger in or something like that. And so again, if you're in a relationship with Natural England, there's some kind of permissions you might need for things like that, but hopefully it's pretty much just doing what you've already been doing and you'll get a decent payment for it. So this is just kind of saying that scarce plants and grassland fungi, this is one of the things that this scheme will pay for. It has done that actually for quite a long time, but nobody knew about it. And so not only did the advisors not know about it, but also the landowners didn't know that they had these fungi. So nobody was getting into these schemes. But over the past couple of years, there's been much higher awareness. I've been working with some of the advisors, Natural England, and so we're starting to get more and more people into these schemes, which is really beneficial for the landowners or land managers, and also for the plants and fungi. So just finally, these are the key things to look out for. If you've got these species on your land, then these are the kind of things that you might spot. So on the left-hand side, top and bottom, is the meadow waxcap. It's one of the most common. It's pretty big. It's quite waxy. It lasts a long time, and where you've got it tends to be quite abundant. And so this is one that you would see when you were driving past a field, and a really good indicator that there's going to be loads of other species there. And then you've got the bright red ones. So not the one that you'd find under a tree with the white spots on. These ones are going to be restricted to grasslands. But if you've got these ones that are bright red, chunky, or small, then again, that's a really good identifier. If you have got these, you think you've got these, there could be funding available to get some surveys done if you're in Nidderdale. And so I might then end up coming and having a look, doing a survey, and through that helping you to get into one of these schemes. So I would encourage you to let people know. And I think, you know, in doing that, a lot of the work that I do is kind of confidential. So it's that data is not necessarily going to go somewhere where you might not want it to go. There's conversations to be had about how that data is used and what have you. Just a word about fungi in grasslands generally. There's loads of different kinds of mushrooms that occur in grasslands, some which occur in very nutrient-rich grasslands, and certainly loads which decompose dung. So if you've got animals, if you've got dung, you're going to have mushrooms, loads of them. But they aren't these ones, and so you've really got to look for these key features, the colours, or you know, this meadow waxcap, the clubs and corals, and then they denote that you've got the symbiotic relationship going on between the fungi and the plants. And you can kind of see from these pictures that these are in generally, you know, shortish sward, but some of them might be in thicker grass, and some of them might be in kind of, you know, heathier, more acidic places. And that basically is it. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Oh, thank you very much for that, Steve. That was brilliant. We've had one question in on the chat from Mal, who's asked which database were the maps from that you showed us in the presentation.
So that database is GBIF, which is a European database. So that takes in data from iNaturalist and various kind of European databases. I don't think it takes in NBN data, but I may be wrong. So there's definitely, it's not showing all of the data that's being collected, but it shows the best data for global records.
And that is literally GBIF, is it?
gbif.org.
Yeah. .org. I'm just sharing that in the chat for you, Mal. Hopefully that link will take you to the homepage of GBIF. Anyone else got any other questions? Or have we answered everything? We've had one through. Can you read that?
Well, I saw it flash up.
So, hi, Steve. Here in Scotland, the bracken encroachment is one of the most worrying threats to uphill grasslands since the banning of azulox in 2023 with no alternative. Do you know if there is anything in the pipeline on bracken encroaching grasslands? And I'm assuming that's having a similar effect to trees, providing shading.
Yeah, so bracken's a real nightmare. You know, historically, bracken would have been collected for animal bedding and you know, various other uses, but it's been really problematic. And a lot of the sites that I go to, there's bracken encroachment. There are waxcaps in the bracken. the bracken puts down loads of litter, it forms a mulch, it basically, stops, changes the habitat completely. I work on quite a lot of sites hand pulling bracken or scything bracken to keep the bracken back. And that's effective, but massively kind of time consuming, and so can only be done if you've got a very special site and a bunch of volunteers, really. I don't know of anything, and I also don't know what impact Agilox or any other herbicide might have. I mean, I know I've seen sites where bracken's been sprayed and then the area's all gone over to creeping thistle, which because of the fact that it'd been there quite a long time, and then the soil was all bare and then all the thistle's blown in. It's just as bad a problem, really. So I can't help with that other than to commiserate and say, yeah, it's a real problem. And I know in the area that I live, we've got a certain valley which used to have loads of rare orchids in, and that's just all bracken now, and they're gone. So it's a real loss. Replying to this next message about what's the youngest waxcap grassland. So the way that I think about this is that a grassland kind of matures with age. So I might go on to, let's say, a meadow which has been fertilized in the past, but just with farmyard manure, but quite a lot. But now the management's changed and they're kind of reducing the inputs and what have you. It's starting to be managed well for diversity rather than for kind of feed value. They might have blackening waxcaps, parrot waxcaps, snowy waxcaps. You might even find a meadow waxcap after a few more years. But you might be looking at 10, 15, 20, 30 years to get to that kind of youngest waxcap grassland. If you want to get some more of those more particular species, and particularly these ones that we're looking at, which are threatened globally, then you're looking at 60 years, 100 years, 150 years. I think the youngest one that I've seen, well, okay, there's two types. So one is reservoir embankments. Reservoir embankments can be 150 years and be really good, be really diverse, because they've been turved with turfs from the local area, which has damaged some of the relationships, but some of them survived. They're really moist, they're free draining, they're kept really well drained, so the kind of management is perfect, and the spores are all kind of in the area. And so they can get really good in about 150 years. But for other sites, the best one that I'd seen, youngest one, was a site which I think was in Nidderdale or close enough. Can't think what the name was. It was a National Trust site, and there'd been lead mining there 300 years ago, and then it had been permanent pasture since the lead mining, and they were starting to get some good diversity. So I think 300 years is like a young waxcap grassland if you actually want to get some decent species. So it is very much a question of, if we lose them, we've got to wait a very long time before they get back to the quality that they would have been. Mole activity. I mean, mole activity is something which I'm very interested in, because it's possible that the moles could move the mycelium around underground, and that could be a good thing, but there's no evidence to say whether that happens or not. That's just conjecture by me. I know of a site where there's heavy kind of mole activity. It's incredibly abundant for waxcaps and other CHEGD species, but there are none of the more vulnerable species there. So there's loads of waxcaps there, but not any of the rarer ones. And I don't know whether those two things are related. There's definitely an issue with rabbit grazing. A lot of the sites that I've worked on have been near grouse shooting, kind of in by land, where there's a lot of controlled, the foxes are controlled, and the rabbits kind of get a little bit out of hand. And there are lots and lots of warrens on kind of sandy soils, and they can really, from all the kind of soil waste that they chuck out and all of the holes and kind of destabilizing the hillside, that can cause a real problem. So any kind of activity that gets out of balance can cause a problem. Right, I'm just going to come back to Emma. Where is your brownfield site, Emma? Are you, Emma, in Wales? So with some of the brownfield sites, if they're coal spoil, then you're looking at super low nutrient sites. And so some of these brownfield sites can be really good, but okay. But I would be interested to see the species range that you get there, to see how they relate to the species that we find in low nutrient grasslands. And then the reservoir embankments can be very rich. I mean, where I live, there's loads and loads of reservoirs, and most of the dams are kind of local wildlife site grade, at least. So they've got some really good diversity and some quite rare species as well.
Big comment there. Let's have a look.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't. And this is something which I've spoken to Natural England about. That there really needs to be some kind of funding for this, because it is a real problem. And actually, where I am, there's a lot of land which is owned by one person, and then this kind of extensive grazing on that land, and it's just not in the kind of, it's not, they're not even tenants. They just have a grazing license. They're just not going to do anything about that bracken, because it's just not worth a while. The amount of income that they're raising from grazing those cattle or sheep on there. So there really needs to be some kind of funding to deal with the bracken. But I just don't know. I don't know what we can do. Yeah, I think that's Colin. Hello. I think that's totally normal. That I on sites can find incredible diversity across all the groups, or they can just be in one or two groups. Some of that can be to do with on a particular year it's good for one thing or another. But if you've surveyed that site a number of times and you're finding that particularly, some sites are just absolutely great for Entoloma, but there doesn't seem to be anything else there, and those sites are much more likely to be missed because people aren't really looking at Entolomas that much, and they don't spot them. But yeah, I also find that I think it's still good, and I guess the SSSI criteria speak to that, because it works for each one, the same with the local wildlife site criteria, if you have those in your area. Not all areas do.
Well, brilliant. Thank you for answering all those questions, Steve. I hope everybody's found the webinar helpful. I'm just going to quickly share my screen one more time to wrap up. Not starting from the beginning, but starting from here. Give me 1 second. So, how can the Nidderdale National Landscape help you? So, the Nidderdale National Landscape, we've managed grassland restoration projects for over 15 years now, and last year alone we did 40 hectares of meadow restoration, which is improving the floristic diversity of the meadows. not only can we help with helping improve the botanical diversity of your grasslands, but we can also help you protect the waxcaps as well. What's on offer? Well, we can come and do soil sampling and vegetation surveys, provide you site-specific management advice bespoke to your requirements and the needs of the land, can manage contractors and organise all the works, and provide really critical ongoing support, because grassland management isn't just for 1 year, it's a constant thing. And all of this is for free. I mentioned vegetation surveys there, but we can also come and do the CHEGD grassland fungi surveys as well. And as Steve mentions, if you're in Nidderdale, we can potentially find some funding to help survey your grasslands. So if you manage or own a grassland within Nidderdale and you want to manage it better for nature, not just for the fungi that exist there, but for everything else, then please get in touch with me. My email address is there and my phone number. But our comms officer will send round an email to everybody who not only attended the webinar, but also booked a ticket with all the information on there. There are loads of resource sheets available online that's inspired this webinar series. So if you go onto the Nidderdale National Landscape website, in the top right corner of the search bar, search grasslands, and these resource sheets will pop up. And they range from managing grasslands not only for fungi, but for invertebrates, birds of prey. It helps you understand what grassland type you have and how to create a species-rich grassland as well. So it will handhold you through your grassland restoration journey. Feedback is really key. So you're going to receive an email from us with links to loads of useful information. There'll be a feedback form as well as a link to sign up to the Nidderdale National Landscape newsletter. The feedback form is really important because it helps us understand what we've done right, what things we could change, and you can provide your opinions on future topics you'd like to see, because we want to create webinars that are interesting for viewers at home. So I just want to say thank you very much for listening, everybody, and I hope you have a nice evening.